back in the early, mid-60s, I was living with my first wife in Shaker Heights. And we were both active in the church, Methodist church. And they had a program called N1, which was you left your suburban church and went to signed to an inner city church for 1 year. And since that was, we were both very active in civil rights, we deliberately lived into an integrated community, the very first suburban integrated community called Ludlow, which was a part of Shaker Heights, and had quite a history of black and white. And in those days, that was very revolutionary to integrate and to have black friends and white friends gather. Anyhow, we worked in this small inner city church. It was actually a Swedish Methodist church that long ago had left the neighborhood when it was now a totally black neighborhood in the east side of Cleveland. And so they would come in for Sunday service, and the young pastor that we were a part of, we tried to serve the neighborhood through the church and different activities. So I got involved in neighborhood activities there, and again, I was visiting in one sense, living in Shaker Heights and coming down to that part. But at that time, I was being a good liberal, see what I could do to make a difference with this situation. The pastor had gone to Chicago, to the Chicago Theological Seminary. They had an immersion program where you went to the ghetto with $1 and you had to survive and so on and so forth. And while he was there, he got some brochures from a place called the Ecumenical Institute on the west side, which was somewhat different than what he was engaged in, which was much more a Alinsky type of social change, a confrontational. And the west side, the Ecumenical Institute, was much more on a cooperative basis. Anyhow, we didn't know anything about it. He brought back the brochures. And one weekend, Friday, we got on the road, and off he and I went, drove all the way to Cleveland, or to Chicago, because we saw they were going to be teaching a course called CS1, which was the cultural studies. We said, this sounds great, the urban revolution, scientific revolution, secular revolution. Let's go take that. So we got there, got at the front desk, and we said, we're here to take CS1. And they said, well, when did you take RS1? Which was the religious studies one. We said, well, he's a pastor, and I minored in theology, so we don't need that. And they said, oh, well, you can't take CS1 without having to take it. And we argued and argued, and for your information, it was Zoe Barley was the registrar at that time. So we had a choice, turn around and drive back to Cleveland or take RS1. So we took RS1 thinking we'd wasted the weekend, but we were there. And without going into a lot of detail of the transformation or the impact that that course had on both of us, never had I encountered a body of people living out of what I had always dreamed there might be. That was the first encounter I had with Joe Matthews. He came in to do the guest lecture, the Freedom Lecture. And I'm sitting there, and I'm already just absolutely floored by what had transpired up to then. And Joe just stood there, and he had his black short-sleeve shirt on, and he looks up at around the group, and he takes his finger and he just points, and he says, I know more about you than your mother knows. Okay, and he said, what I know is you're all sons of bitches. And he says, the reason I know you're a son of a bitch because I'm a son of a bitch. And I'd never heard a clergyman ever speak like that. And so I knew I was in a different place, and I was in a different community. Anyhow, he went ahead and gave this freedom lecture that was so powerful, I thought he was going to have a heart attack. I've never seen anybody so existentially driven to communicate. And sweat was pouring down, and when he left, I said, I've encountered somebody who I've never, ever dreamed existed. So we finished that program, And we drove back to Cleveland, and I swear we levitated the whole way. I mean, it was like I had discovered a reality that I only dreamed existed. And as you know, the story that they tell at the end, where they're engaged in Fifth City, the reconstruction of the urban, and they passed out materials, and the fact that it was comprehensive and what have you, and that they were creating a place not to alleviate the problems, but to build something brand new. And it just struck me that I had been spending my whole life putting one Band-Aid on, by Band-Aid, by Band-Aid. Turkey basket here, program there, and so on. All based on how do I get rid of a problem? How do I solve a problem? And what I discovered was it wasn't about solving a problem, it was about creating something incredibly new called the urban life of meaning and community and so on. And to have a group of people who had moved into that and created that was just beyond my wildest dream. One of my heroes at that time, came out of college, was a man by the name of William Stringfellow. Bill Stringfellow was a lawyer, graduated from Yale, I believe, who moved into Harlem. And he wrote a book about his life experience of being a lawyer serving the black community. And it was, again, out of his Christian commitment and so on. But it was a deep address of what it meant to fundamentally give your life to that which is the suffering of this world. But I never thought there'd be, I always thought it was an individual kind of thing, and here was a whole body of people creating something new. So that was my first step, and you could call that an awakening to a reality that I didn't even know existed, and a community that I didn't even know existed. All of my connections with religion, theology, the church before that, I had never had anybody talk about the symbol system, the words, the God, the Christ, the Holy Spirit, the church, is a way of saying, first you have to identify an activity, and then you name it. So God is not an idea, it's not a concept, it's not a theology, it's an activity that you encounter, or that encounters you, to put it another way. And therefore, when you get encountered by something that throws you up against your limits, or throws you into a situation that you would prefer not to have, that is when the question arises, what in the hell's going on right now? And what they did in the course was saying, you have just encountered that which we call God. And no one had ever done that before. Everything else, God was a concept, God was an idea, God was a something that you had to believe in. And this had nothing to do with believing in anything. It had to do with experiential. And that, I remember going to bed that night after we spent time going through Bultmann, who raises that question for you about your life and all the various experiences of where you've been felt empowered and where you've been cut off. And I remember lying in bed and just not being able to sleep, because it was, you had to wrestle with your life. You weren't wrestling with ideas. And it would be dishonest to say that I was an idea man. And I still am to a great degree. Ideas meant a lot to me. Ideas were real. Ideas are what I lived in and out of. Experience was something sort of that happened that had to get out of the way while I thought about something. And this was such a radical address. Same way with the second section, where you go through the what we call the Christ event, or what is it that enables you to take that which has just broken you open and given you a situation that in many cases you'd prefer not to have, but to embrace it as your life. And it was in that section in which I began to grasp that any time you wish for something other than what you've got, You are trying to escape G-O-D. You're trying to escape from the reality of your life. And therefore, it behooves you to pay attention to what's going on. Let me give you another personal example of that right now. About 10 years ago, it got clear that Judy was beginning to experience memory problems. We didn't know what it was. We still don't know what it is, but it's progressed. And I presume you could probably put it under the category of Alzheimer's, though you only know that when you cut open the brain afterwards. You'd be surprised at how much sympathy I get. Oh, you know, you're just so brave, you're so this, you're so that, and so on. You know, you get all of this sympathy. But behind that sympathy is, I'm sure I'm glad it's not me. And I just say, you don't know the joy of what it means to embrace life as it is. Would I wish it was different? Probably, but I gave up wishing a long time ago. Would I wish they would, I hope they come up with a cure or something? You betcha. But that doesn't change the reality that I've got this reality on my hands. I got this life on my hand, and by God, there isn't going to be another one. So either you embrace this one, or you turn bitter and wish and hope and curse the life that you've got. So this is not a burden. It's different, but it's not a burden. It's what it is. So that's how it stayed with me. I won't go into a lot of detail on the third section on the freedom, except that again, in the freedom section where Bonhoeffer enables you to struggle with the question of what does it mean to be responsible. That was a radical address in the sense that I always thought you could pretty well figure out what was right to do. And the only question was, did you have the courage to act to do what was right? Or you ended up justifying what you did do as, well, I really couldn't do that at this point or what have you. The price was too high to pay. And that section allowed me to, how to put it, I'd have to use the language they use, to walk in a freedom that is not a freedom to do any damn thing you want, but a freedom to take responsibility for everything that you do. And the thing that you begin to become aware of is that you never know your actions of what the results are going to be. Short term, they may be fantastic. Long term, they may be exactly the wrong thing to do. You never know. And so the internal capacity you've got to do is two things. One, the capacity to surrender. By that I mean render up. To act and then say, I acted in whatever, no justification, but render it up because you now have a new situation on your hands. And then from that, or parallel to that, is detachment. It's so easy to get attached to your successes, or if you want to walk around guilty, to your failures. It's so easy to keep your name on them. You carry them around like stuff in a backpack and say, well, let me trot out this. It's got my name on it. See? Right there. I invented Goodwright 3114, which I did. Look at how much difference it's made in the world, Or look at these two kids, Those are mine. They're mine. They got my name on it. Well, one doesn't because she was adopted. But, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you go through your life with your backpack of those things on this side, which you pull out, that have your name on it. These also have your name on it, but you don't talk about those. These are the things that you just as soon not talk about. And what I've learned over these years is it doesn't matter. It's the capacity to surrender it and to embrace what's happening. And then the last section, which is on, quote, the church, or what are you going to do with your life? Now that you have no excuse, you know, all the excuses, that was the other thing that happened in this program to me, is that every excuse sort of just got taken away, because no matter what excuse you had, you still had the life on your hands that you had on your beforehand. And the excuse no longer was a reason. You just had your freedom to choose rather than come up with an excuse of why you couldn't act. And so once those are taken away from you, you're left with but one decision. What am I going to do with this one unique, unrepeatable existence that happens to have 2 kids, that happens to have a wife, that has has this obligation and that obligation and so on? You're just left, all of that is just dropped aside, and you're left with that solitary question. What are you going to do with this one unrepeatable? And what they talk about in this course is it doesn't matter what you choose. And that really, threw me, because surely there must be a right thing to do and a wrong thing to do. It must be right to go here and wrong to stay there, No. You're just left with your damn decision. And it's the authenticity of that decision and the dialogue you have to have with yourself, so that you're not justifying staying where you are because you were afraid to make this decision. And then they lay out what that meant, of what it meant to live on the edge of history, in which you create that which is required. And there are only 2 kinds of people: those who make a decision to be about creating, and those who live off of the creation. Both are fine. The only question is, which one do you want to live? Do you want to live off of the life that others have done and say thank you? Or do you want to be one that helps create the new? And by the way, nobody's going to say thank you, Somebody might, but it doesn't make any difference whether they know your name or reflect it or give you credit or what have you. It doesn't matter. So when that got combined, I had a new self-picture, a self-story of what the radical life meant. By radical, I don't mean social radical. I mean authenticity, the radical authenticity that was just available, had nothing to do with what you believed in, had nothing to do with what words you used, had nothing to do with anything other than the fact that you could embrace, and you had the possibility of embracing the life that you have. And that changed me forever, ever and ever and ever. But there's chapter 2 in this process. And I talk about this as my encounter with care. You talked about the ultimate encounter, or what have you, or you've been talking about that. And I once had to give a talk or a little presentation to a group of fellow colleagues who had come into Chicago. And one of the category was care. And I told a story that my whole life, up until not too long before that, I thought care was something I had. I cared. And life was about budgeting your care, Okay, what do you care about? Well, I care about my family. Okay, I care about my job. I care about my lawn. I care about my dog. I care about my community. I care, so you got this spectrum of relationships that, quote, call for your care. And so what life was about is budget. Okay, I can budget so much care for here and so much for there and so much for there. And life was about balancing the budget. And it would get out of balance, and you're ignoring your family or you're ignoring your job or what have you. But it was, you manage your budget. And I was pretty smug and pretty, confident that I was doing a pretty damn good job. I was working on the inner city, but I had a nice family. I could give care to that. I cared for my church, I cared, and so on and so forth. And I was really good. And then I took this course called RS1. And all of a sudden now, care took on a different reality. And I've talked to you a little bit before about what I call the vocational question. What are you going to do with your life? Where is the one thrust or the deed to which is fundamentally your life is about? You have lots of activities, but your life needs to be about something. And that something cannot be defined by somebody else. You cannot live that something as if an ought. You ought to be doing this. You ought to be in the poor. You ought to be there. You ought to be here. You ought to be with your family. That's your first obligation. So you're in the midst of this stew. And after I took that course, that stew was going on because I was a research scientist. And I felt like I was fulfilling a long time dream of being a scientist. I wanted to be a scientist ever since I could remember. So I had books on astronomy. I had a wonderful aunt who, she was a cousin, I'm sorry, who would always give my brother and I books, which we didn't like. We wanted toys. She would get books. But my books were all science. There was a book on snakes. I'll never forget that. And then there was another book, and so on. And I became deeply committed to science. This was in the 50s. And I knew I wanted to be a nuclear physicist. I just knew, because that was the new atomic age and was going to solve all the problems, and I wanted to be a scientist, and I knew exactly what I was going to do and how I was going to be. Well, there was a couple of detours, one called calculus and some others, to which nuclear physics went out. But I got a chance to get into chemistry, and I became an organic chemist, went to graduate school, and then got a job with B.F. Goodrich Company and working in their chemical division. And I had a great time, I had all these years of, they used to call our research center the country club because there was no, quote, pressure. You guys are just out there, could do any damn thing you wanted, and every rest of us have to work. You guys, and so on. So there was a lot of animosity from the rest of the company about those of us who were in this ivory tower. All we had to do was think and play. So I had this lovely challenge, and I talked to you a little bit about, I had some success. And I made the company a lot of money, of which I saw none. But I enjoyed it. I loved it. But I was involved with the Institute at the time. And I was balancing. Beautiful job. Here was my volunteer work with the Institute of Cultural Affairs, Ecumenical Institute. Here was my job. And I had this incredibly balanced railroad track to which I was straddled to. Had a career, had a job, and then I had all this activity here. And as far as I could tell, the railroad track was just fine, and I rode it. Until all of a sudden I began to see it's split, it's dividing. They're not going down the same direction. And it was harder and harder to balance this. I took a leave of absence from my work to go work for the Institute, came back. 6 months later, I asked him for another leave of absence. Anyhow, the story of it is this. We had in our labs, we had different labs, one next to the other. And the man who was in the lab next to mine was retiring. We threw a party for him. And he went away, and I came in the next day, and I peeked in the window, and, desk was all clean, and you kind of wonder, who's going to move in there? And on the door, for all of our doors, was our name tag. And it was a vinyl strip put into a slot. And it was him. He'd taken it. Or they had taken it out. I didn't know which. And my door was right here, and I saw my name. And I said, damn, someday there's going to be a different name there. I'm going to be gone. Now, that sounds logical, okay? This was not logical. This hit me like a ton of bricks. You will be gone from here, and someone else, probably much more competent, certainly paid more, will be doing what you're doing. I went in and I sat down, and I visualized the next 20, 30 years of activity. And I looked at all the different things I might work on, and I looked back, and I looked at the 10 years I'd already had. And damn, if that didn't look just like that. More of the same. Fun, yes. Fulfilling in a way, yes. Meaningful, yes. Making a difference, yes. But that phrase that we now use of been there, done that, all of a sudden was echoing in my head, and I realized there are thousands of people can do what I'm doing. Thousands. Probably better. And I said, that's the day I left. Now, it took 3 years of courage to build up the courage, and a divorce, and several other existential crises for me to walk out the door. But I did. And so, and I talk about this talk, I said, that's when I discovered that care isn't something that you have, that you budget. Care has you. Care is an objective reality to which you get to participate in care. And that was a revolutionary thought in my mind. Because what I told the people in the talk was that when you grasp that care has you rather than you have care, then you realize that your care will take you where you do not want to go. You don't want to go there. But at some point, you got to make a decision. Either I'm authentically connected to that care, which has my name on it, or I turn and walk some other way and deny that connectivity. Now, you can call that the calling. You can call that a vocation. There's lots of names for it. But I believe each and every person has an opportunity to encounter that care. And it won't necessarily be something, noble, like I'm called to be a teacher, I'm called to be a poet, I'm called to be a builder, or what have you. Those are all fantastic. But I believe each and every person has a life to which that question is a point of reference for all things that are happening. And when they discover what that point is, then life begins to take on a significance. They begin, as we talked about here, they begin to build a story around whatever that isness is, whatever that uniqueness is. And therefore, they begin to build their own mythology, their own self-story of authenticity. Not of convenience, not of this is why I'm doing something. But this is what I have, and they may not use these words, which I don't care. They may not call it a calling. They may not say I'm responding to something which I do not know. They just find a home. They find a resonance in what they're doing that makes them feel alive. And that's the test. To what thing do you respond to which you feel alive? Not excited, no. alive, as if life itself was saying, this is for you. And the truth of the matter is that whatever that is, it may not end up exactly what you wanted, and it may end up tragic in the eyes of some people, and it may even seem tragic to you at some point. So this is not about finding the right job or finding the right person or finding this and so on and so forth that makes you, quote, happy. I'm all for being happy. But you remember, I don't know, it was Pierce, Joe Pierce used to say, when you talk about happiness, it's sort of like watermelon. I like watermelon. It is delicious, and so on. But it is not happiness, It's something else. You're not looking for your watermelon. You're looking for that to which authenticity and self become revealed to you, often in ways you have no way of comprehending until later reflection. So that's the journey that I went on in those early years. And the rest of the life has been acting that out. Sometimes with open eyes, sometimes with somewhat blinders on. But that always knowing that when you're authentic, you feel alive. And I know when I feel alive, or some people talk about it as being centered, and I know when I'm off-center and not alive. And so you talk about ritual or practice. My question always is, what enables me to get back to a center, an integrated self, an integral self, that is where I find then something flows, the source of which I do not know. And the first thing you begin to realize it's not you. It's drawing on all your experiences. It's sort of like, yes, it's you because you're drawing on this experience and this encounter and so on. And then that gets somehow synthesized and projected in something you do or something you say or the way you do something. But you become very clear that whatever that is, it's coming through you. It isn't you. I don't know if I'm saying that well, because it is me in one sense, It is my creativity, but I don't own it. I don't know where the hell it comes from. It just pops up. And I think a composer says the same thing. I don't know who was saying they about their composing and writing. These notes just show up in my head, and I just start playing them. I don't know where they came from, but I just, I'm able to write them down and play them. And that's where this tune came from, Well, that's what genuine creativity feels like. And it's too rare an experience, but it's one you never forget and one you always love to return home to. You have an existence with somebody that you have your imaginary bucket list, One of our bucket list things was at some point we would hope to be able to go visit. We had our 5 countries that we were, we wanted to sometime get to Ireland or South Africa or New Zealand or China, what have you. And we've both traveled the world, but there were certain places that I wanted to, again, encounter. Not visit. I wanted to encounter. And that isn't going to happen, It just, you live for a while saying, well, I think it might happen, could happen, but at some point you have to turn and say, this is not going to happen. When I went through the divorce, that was also one of those encounters with the mystery of life. And without getting into any detail whatsoever, that divorce was so painful Because in one sense there was no, quote, reason. There wasn't somebody else. There was nothing other than the fact that my life, wanted to go one way, and she did not want to be part of it. So I backed off and said, fine, well, I'll stay here, we'll live in Shaker Heights, we'll raise the kid, and so on and so forth. But by then the decision had already been made. And it was the wrong decision. There was no reason. There was no reason not to stay together. And it was such an emotional journey for me that at some point I thought I was going to lose my mind. I just, because things had to make sense to me, and this did not make any sense. So I spent a year trying to make all the adjustments that somehow would cause the reality that I wanted to happen. And I'll never forget the day that I went to a Guardians gathering in Chicago. And I walked at the end of it, into Joe's cubicle. And he was sitting there. And I'd seen him during the week, but I had not talked to the weekend, and I had not talked to him. And I stepped in, I was just about to drive off, and I just stepped in. And I stood there, and I looked at Joe, and Betty was there, and Mary Warren Moffat was there. And tears just started coming down my face. I couldn't speak. And I said, all I could say to Joe was, she's insisting on a divorce. And I just stood there. And Joe lights up one of his Salems. And he looks at me and he says, Gilles, one thing about Joe is he never called you by your, he's never called me by my first name. It was always Gilles. Gilles, he said, you need to know one thing. He said, if you've done everything you can to change the situation, then you gotta realize God knows what he's doing. For you and for her. And that was a transformative statement. And as I reflect on it, as I tell people, what happened was the pain did not go away. The pain was just as intense, but I could bear it. I could bear it. And that made all the difference. Before, I couldn't bear it. I couldn't bear to face the reality. Now I could. And I still didn't want it to happen. I still wanted the life that I could have. And so that, for me, that was a releasing word that he did for me, is that encounter with that. Now, since that, both my children were quite young at the time, say 9 and 7, I believe. And I went to India, and I left the kids to their mother. We had a very good relationship, still do. But that, I knew, it scarred them. You know, you don't lose your father who isn't there, and you don't know why he's not there, and so on and so forth. He's just not there. And it's affected both of them, and both of them have had to struggle with it, and they've struggled with me over that. So there are consequences to whatever decision you make that you live with. There is a mistaken, in my mind, mistaken perception that once you've made a decision towards saying yes to whatever the mystery has for your life, that somehow everything works out. And it doesn't. It just doesn't. It doesn't turn out the way you wanted it. Often what you do falls flat on its face, and so on. And it's sort of like the mystery gives you an opportunity just to participate in authenticity. That's all the mystery does, is enables you to participate in authenticity. And the consequences, you have no idea. Just one more thing. I've become a lover of poetry and poets. Because as you get older, you begin to realize the poet speaks from the heart, the good poet. And therefore, that's where you get pierced by good poetry. And so I've searched and continue to encounter great poetry. I'm a great lover of Rumi, because he talks about what it means to, I guess to use his language, to dance with the divine, to dance with the mystery, to be drunk. He uses the term drunk a lot, which is the way I would talk about, you're really alive. You know, you're really, really, really alive. So much for that you feel ecstatic in that. I tried to write poetry. Never turned out worth anything. But I did write one line of poetry, which maybe somebody else has written, so I can't take credit for it. But I said this: you never know what shore the ripples reach when the stone is tossed with love. You never know. And that's all you can do, isn't it? You can only act with love, not emotion, not the emotional love. With, here's where I place my best intention, most detached intention. And then let the ripples flow, and you never know what shore they will reach. When we do programs, when I was, I spent 22 years in India working almost totally with the private sector. And we would do seminars with them on leadership development. And what does it mean what does it mean to structurally allow what I just talked about to happen? And you can do that, and that's another story. But I feel that organizations need to be a place in which that kind of authentic action can be manifest. And you have people who operate out of that self-understanding, who allow that to happen. So one of the exercises we used to do with these young, and they were all young men, was to have them do a charting of their life, a life journey. And we would reflect. And I had an exercise, and I had a section there that was for people. And I had a series of questions. Name 3 teachers that had a big effect on you. Name 3 authors that had a big effect on you. 3, et cetera, movies. Anyhow. So, and you just write those down when in your life you had it. And we go through an exercise where that gets processed, where people begin to discover in various chunks of their life was about something. And therefore, there was a significance that was going on. They had a purpose. They also had a set of values that were guiding their actions in that period of time. And that's what gives that period, it has an energy to it. When you're engaged in something significant that has a purpose, and you say, during this period, I'm getting an education was what I was about. This is what I was about, raising a family. This I was about that. It doesn't matter what you title it. It's just clear that you had a focus in your life. You had a purpose to everything. And the journey is, how do you move through those sets of purposes in such a way that the whole thing has a story, rather than just a bouncing along, bumping into this and then all of a sudden bumping into that, and when you get all the final bump bumps you into the funeral pyre or whatever it is, So anyhow, in the exercise, we sit in a circle when we're processing it, And I get people to talk about people in their lives, because it's the encounter with people that fundamentally is where the life exchange takes place. You can have life exchange by encountering with nature. You know, people have that all the time. They have an encounter with the ultimate reality through a dialogue with that. But mostly, you encounter it by your encounter with another human being. And so I get people to tell stories about teacher, who did you write down, and why, and what difference did that person make in your life. I tell you, after 3 or 4 of those stories, you could cut the awe in the room. Each one was a deep revelation of how they were different because that person believed in them or challenged them or what have you, you know, just that. And that's what I want. So I want them to see that life is about encounter. Life is about when you meet another person, there's an exchange, or there's no exchange. And the tragedy is that if we think about our lives, there's only a few people that we remember encountering. And then there's tens of thousands that somehow you bump like a billiard ball and you have no idea that anything got exchanged whatsoever. And so we talk about that, and I end the session with two things, one question and then a final statement. 2 questions. I said, because I was in India, I said, does anybody know, I've asked this of thousands of people, does anybody know the name of the ticket collector who threw Gandhi off the train? I'm looking for that guy. The name of the guy. Does anybody know who that was? Of course, nobody knows. I said, wouldn't you like to thank that son of a bitch? Wouldn't you like to go and say thank you for being a son of a bitch? Because had you not been that son of a bitch and tossed that man off the train, history would never be the same. And then I said, you know, and who have been the sons of bitches in your life? That because of what they did or said, your life is different, dramatically different. And wouldn't you like to thank them, though you certainly didn't thank them at the moment? Well, that causes them to think a little bit. Because then you start going through the list of sons of bitches in your life, you know. Now, what can I thank that one for? You know, I just seen never showed up and so on. And I tell stories about people in our organization who are SOBs, but I love them, you know. But God dang, they were SOBs. So then I ask them, the second question is, can anybody name the people who've been serving us here? What are the names of the people? Nobody can. I said, well, this one is named so-and-so, and this one is so-and-so, and this one is so-and-so, and this one is so-and-so. And I said, you need to encounter each and every person you come across. Make an exchange. Just finding out what their name is. They'll never forget that somebody asked them what their name was. And you won't forget that you took the trouble to humanize this person that for you is fundamentally just cleaning the tables, putting the water back in place, you know, etc., and setting up the table, whatever it is. And I said, this is what life is about in an organization. How do you honor? How do you enable each and every person to feel significant in what they're doing? They're not names, they're not positions, they're not resources, for God's sakes. One of the worst things we ever did was to name a department HRD. You know, Human Resource Development. Damn it, I'm nobody's resource. First and foremost, they're human beings. And therefore, and I shared this with you once before, you need to find a way to enable the organization through its language, through its self-understanding, through its thing, to call into question that kind of attitude. And so I suggested that they change the name to HDR, Human Development Resourcing. That what you have is you have these human beings working in your environment that you want to develop into full human beings. And your job is to enable them to source their greatness, source their creativity, source their uniqueness, express their uniqueness. That's the only job you have. And if that uniqueness and capacity doesn't suit what you're about, you have an obligation to send them someplace else. And say, your talents and your calling, or whatever language you use, need to be expressed someplace else. So that's what I do with that little exercise. Third exercise, final exercise. I said, you know, I have no idea, and I really don't, when it's all over, what does it mean to be held accountable? Whatever the heck that means. And I said that this I do know, that if there is such a thing as an accountability, it will not be how many things have your name on it. I built this, I did that, and so on and so forth. I said, you will not be judged on what you accomplished or didn't accomplish, because all of that is part of the creative process. So what you didn't do becomes the situation that somebody else must embrace, period. And that's all life is embracing, 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 embracing. It's not some kind of progress. Though indeed we would love to have progress. It's not about that. It's about people being able to embrace and create with what's given. So I said, don't go there and with your checklist of, you see my name, this, and I accomplished that, and so on and so forth. Those all got. I said, it won't be that. There'll be but one question asked, and that's this: how many other people wrote your name down on their sheet of paper? How many people encountered you to which a deposit was made that made a difference in their life? That's all. Anyhow, that's what I mean by the encounter. The word that comes to me that allows me to reflect on that kind of encounter is what is termed synchronicity. Because my life, I can track many things that seem to be have to do with synchronicity, that somehow I was at the right place at the right time to meet that person or to meet this situation. And it's always been kind of magical. It's been kind of, wow, isn't that an incredible coincidence, and so on. And I've given up on that explanation. I just have. I believe that there is, don't want to get too Presbyterian here, not that there is a predestined destination, but I believe that there is a field, again, of energy. There is a field of possibility. And let me try and put it in a slightly different way. We talked a little bit about the imbalances in life. And that at some point, just like earthquake happens because something finally has to shift. Something happens, and then boom, you get that earthquake. So it is in the social milieu, that you can live life as if it wasn't going to change. But pressures are building. Things that you don't know about are building. And therefore there will be a happening, there'll be an encounter. Call it with a mystery, call it with the way life is. But at some point, that imbalance will come at you. Same way, if you are resonant with that life, that same encounter will come as, here is something that you can act on, that will release that pressure, that will be part of the solution, will be part of the creative process, to use a very broad term. And I've had many of those happenings that when I look back on, I'd say, wasn't that coincidental? And that's the way I did it early on. Just going back to chemistry, I invented this compound. It was coincidental. I mean, it really, 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 really was. One of the things we used to do is we would get scientific journals from the library. There was no internet, of course, at those points. You couldn't go on and find things. You had to search for things. And so we would circulate the Journal of Organic Chemistry, the Journal of American Chemical Society, the this, the that, and so on and so forth. There was dozens of journals, and you signed up for which ones you wanted brought to your desk, and usually you just scratched your name off and put it in the outbox, You didn't have time for it. But I signed up, and one of them, God knows why, I signed up for was a Swedish Journal of Chemistry or Organic Chemistry. I've forgotten what it was. I knew it was Swedish. It was English, but Swedish journal. And I signed up for it, and this one day I picked it up, and I usually just put it in the outbox. And I leafed through it, and I saw this chemical. And I said, that's what I need to make. But it had to be modified to be a stabilizer, an antioxidant. It was not. It was simply a isocyanuric acid, for those who want to look up the term, base chemical. But I said, that might be what I need to make. And that became the crystal. And I've often seen creativity, as I talk about, as like a crystal. See, in chemistry, when you make something new, it tends not to be a crystal. It tends, if you're making an organic chemical, it tends to be a goo. Because it's never been made before. It's never had a form before. It's never existed before. So it doesn't necessarily crystallize, get into orientation a crystal has to have. And so what you do is you scrape the side of the test tube, and you do all sorts of, you dissolve it and bring it back down and so on, and et cetera, et cetera. And it always has impurities in it which keeps it from crystallizing and so on. But once it crystallizes, once it takes form, then it always crystallizes after that. And not just you, anywhere in the world. If somebody made that chemical, it will not come as a goo, it will come as a crystal, if it's pure. For years, that was known as the crystals in the beard theory. In the 1800s, the chemists would make things, and they would think that, well, what happens was that because it crystals, they get in the beard, and when they walk around, they just sort of disperse in the air, and that's how they become something that something else can build on, Not true. Again, going back to some of the things, there's a morphogenetic field. I not just believe in, I really know that it happens. So that time and space don't matter. When it happens, that crystal consciousness, if you can use that term, that crystalline reality, is immediately available to any other that is there. That's why so often you'll look in history, you'll find the same breakthrough in consciousness happens multiple places in the world, and they sure as hell didn't get around to talk to each other. There is something, quote, in the air that they latched onto, and that consciousness was available to someone else's consciousness, unbeknownst to them. And that's why we had great movements, because that possibility happens and you realize this is the time. Call it pregnant time, call it destinal time, call it whatever, time you want. But there is a time for things to happen. So, and it's true in your life. And I believe that what your life is about is being awake, so that when that time happens, at least it doesn't go past you, You, damn, isn't it fascinating? I'm talking to this person. Maybe, just maybe, this is a crystal for something. I don't know. I don't know. But that's what it means to live your life out of, quote, what we call live out of possibility. Possibility is about the ability to say each and every situation has within it a seed. And whether you're contributing to its crystallization or its growth or what have you, you have no idea. Maybe it was just all you needed to do was just dump on it and give it a little fertilizer, and somebody else will harvest it, as we sang about. You don't know. I mean, if you live some other way, you think you're the center of the universe, Everything is sort of happening in and through me. That's stupid. But when you're genuinely participating in life, that's the way you encounter, as if everything you do is contributing in a way to this happening. I got to start with myself, okay? Because in one sense, I think he made a profound effect on history. But again, history will be the judge of that. But I do know he had a profound effect on me. And as I talked about the very first encounter to the very last encounter, and I was there at his deathbed and visited next to him just maybe 3 hours before he died. And I'll never forget both encounters. The first one, I've never seen somebody speak like that, act that way, and being so authentic. And so I guess that the legacy is not so much, which was incredibly profound, capacity to think, to build, to analyze, to communicate. He was an incredible communicator. And all of that, which I think is incredibly gifted, is not anything like what he demonstrated as being alive. Here's a person who embraced life like no one else I'd ever seen before or since, and lived it with a kind of freedom that I talked about. And he didn't give a damn about what you thought about him, about what his kids thought about him, nothing. All he cared about was, am I being in a relationship to the mystery of life? And is that authentic? If it's authentic, that's the only question I finally have to live. Is my life authentic? And it always wasn't, but by God, that question never left the table, wherever he was. So anytime you encountered Joe, not only was he alive in ways that other people don't seem to be alive, but that very aliveness audited your life. Joe never judged anybody that I know of. So much that because he was alive, you had a question, are you alive? So just being in his presence, there was an audit. What do you know, here's a man who knows what he's doing with his life, and he knows where he's going, and he used to talk about it. You stand next to your grave, and you live with your eye understanding of when you're gonna topple in. You live, as he said, as a dead man. And once you've already decided you're dead, there isn't anything that can threaten you. And history has always been filled with and changed by dead men. Dead men walking. People have already decided that what their life was about. So that for me was the fundamental and the lasting legacy. Like him, dislike him, and boy, he's got fans on both sides. I think almost everyone would agree that he lived his own life and was unique, and he wasn't living it to show off or to be somebody. And the very fact that Joe insisted that when he died there would be no memory marking where his existence is. He said, I came in without a name, and I'm going to go out without a name. And so if you tried to find his ashes, which he was cremated, he was, of course, are spread around, but in the place where he's, quote, buried, the urn, there's nothing but a cross. No name, no nothing, just a cross. For me, that's what it means to render up your existence. And Joe did that. From an intellectual standpoint or from a theological standpoint, I think Joe's legacy is yet to be fully appreciated, in my humble opinion. For I think the work that Joe, and then Joe would give credit to the whole collective mind. This was not just Joe. There was, when you were part of this thing, just like I was talking to you about being in a research center, where all of a sudden, I was nothing special, but I participated in this field of creative endeavor that occasioned, because the field was real there, it occasioned that creativity within me and others. So too in the order. Taken individually, we're just on a scale of sons of bitchness, there's a big son of a bitch and there's a little son of a bitch and medium son of a bitch. But we were just, we're just individuals and always will be. But collectively, you get a field of energy. You get a field of consciousness in which people operating with a common mind and a common image and a common set of methodologies and a common vocabulary all of a sudden can communicate and co-create, even at a distance, that absolutely is marvelous. And when you put 1,000 people together who are doing this, which we often had in our summer programs, you get amazing creative breakthroughs in how to understand things, how to model things, how to interpret things, and so on. And so all of our work was based on our capacity to enable the collective corporate mind to have expression. We didn't surrender our souls, we didn't surrender our individuality, we weren't part of a cult, we didn't worship Joe or anything else. We all understood that we were here with our own accountability and our own journey. Nevertheless, we understood that what we call disciplined corporateness was the key to our capacity to create. The right brain, which many people talk about as the creative side, is that part that responds to holistic thinking, it responds to patterns, but it also responds to sound and images and story. This is the mythic side of the brain. And therefore, when you have a myth that you can participate in, or the mythic you participate in, then that aliveness shows up in the left brain in what you produce. But the right brain, now what is the most powerful aspects of this mythology? Is singing, sound. It is in the resonance, in the rhythm, and in the capacity to harmonize, to express your deepest, profoundest thoughts in a tune or poetry in such a way that we literally carried ourselves with the song. This is neutral territory. People can carry very evil things with songs also. So the song itself, singing, is a neutral category. So what do you sing about? You know, to what are you going to sing about? Being on behalf of? Are you going to sing about caring for people? Are you going to sing about the cost of my care? Are you going to sing about the mystery? Are you going to sing about the wonder of all, the wonder of the mystery? Are you going to sing about the wonder of an individual? Or are you going to sing about the greatness of this and the greatness of that, you know, and you know, the German, you know, Third Reich. I mean, they had a symbol system, they had a mythology, but it was turned inward as a dialogue with that which was not related to the mystery. So when you sing, you are in communion with an energy field that when that energy field is reflected in the, quote, the way life is, with the void, with the mystery, which is where this part of the brain dialogues. It has access, direct access to the mystery. When what you activate that with is in resonance with, in harmony with, in appreciation of that mystery, then you get a taste of what it means to love God, which most people have no way of using those two words together. They really don't, you know. Oh, God, love God, you know. Oh, I must go out and plant some plants or something. I don't know what it means to love God. What it means to love God is to participate in that grand mystery that someday is going to take you and destroy your existence. That's what, you know, that's the reality you've got to constantly be in dialogue with. That's why fear and fascination. You know, the mystery is both the encountered with wonder and fear. You know, I mean, they're just two sides of the encounter. And the people who like to sell the joy juice, the ones who want you to just, you know, live a holy life, you know, so that you can just face the mystery with all the joy and the wonder and the happiness, you know, and don't turn their face to this part of the mystery. No, you got to live with both faces, because they're two sides of the same reality.